with my partner Elaine Liu. We're a part of the program BranchOut, a nonprofit program with Veritas education leaders that was co-founded by Dr. Yushan Wu and Mr. Richard Wang in 2015. This year, we have over 150 high school student mentors coming from over 40 different schools, spanning across 4 different states.
We started out as a peer STEM mentoring program working at the community centers, homeless shelters, and county summer credit recovery programs, and have expanded into a community outreach program to promote cross-cultural understanding by featuring community heroes, creating research articles, and organizing career panels. As an award-winning community engagement program, we've received endorsement from U.S. Congress, including Senator Tim Kaine and former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Additionally, our Innovator program won the U.S. Congressional App Challenge Award last year.
As part of BranchOut's goal to promote civic engagement, community, and STEM education, we're so excited to be presenting this very informative panel on role models in our community. Tonight's theme, the COVID-19 education crisis, lesson for parents and students. The past few months have been a challenging time for the nation and the world as a whole, and looking and caring for our communities has never been more important. Our featured speaker is Dr. Susan Neuman, NYU professor and chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education. She has served on numerous nonprofit boards, including the IRA Board of Directors, and has been the former editor of Reading Research Quarterly, the most prestigious journal in reading research. Dr. Neuman has received 2 Lifetime Achievements for Research in Literary Development and is the Fellow of the American Educational Research Association. She has also written over 100 articles and authored and edited 11 books.
Let me take a moment to introduce BranchOut's co-founder, Dr. Yushan Wu. Dr. Wu is the co-founder of Veritas Education Leaders and chair of the Harvard Asian American Alumni Alliance, DC. As a woman minority entrepreneur and educator, Dr. Wu has been invited to speak at events on topics including race relations, international education, and mental wellness by organizations such as Harvard University and McDonald's Education Workshops. Because of her passion to bring equity to all and raise cross-cultural awareness, she co-created BranchOut, a youth community outreach program in 2015. As an award-winning program, BranchOut has launched several innovative projects to bring the communities closer together. We are thrilled to have you with us this evening, and I'm sure you all will provide valuable information for all of us. Audience members can type questions throughout the meeting, and they will be answered later.
Thank you so much, Elaine and Alan. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Neuman, for being with us today. And thank you for picking today as your presentation day, because actually today happened to be my birthday. So like, I'm using this as a way to celebrate my birthday. Thank you all for being here with me during COVID. So we have 7 people from registering for this event from 7 different states, which is really, really exciting. We have students, we have parents. I'm sure they have a lot of questions. So I guess we also have some questions for you, but we will start with the first one, which is a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
So like, what got you into this field?
Oh, that's interesting. I think I fell into the field. I was interested in teaching. I was a 5th grade teacher, and I loved the children. I loved what I was doing, but I didn't think I was very good at it. And I knew I had a lot to learn. And so I went back to school, and I kept focusing more and more on literacy development in particular, because I thought that is the key to ensuring that our kids are really doing well in school. And I kept going back to school, and I realized that I felt that I could make more of a difference by getting into policy kinds of issues, doing research, and speaking to groups like yours about the importance of early literacy.
That's wonderful. I didn't know that you were a 5th grade teacher.
I was.
So I guess a lot of people in the audience today are first generation parents or second generation students. Do you have any suggestions or tips for these parents in terms of how to coach their children, how to make sure that they really enjoy reading and writing, you know, as a, like from their heart, right? Not just for school.
Right. I think one of the things that's interesting and something that all parents should consider is um, how to make learning fun for children. In this age of COVID, a lot of our kids are going to be learning remotely. And frankly, especially for kids who are young, this is not an easy task to spend time in front of a machine and try to interact as if we were face to face. And so one of the things I think is really important is that parents reach out to their children and understand that this is not an easy task and that they should give them a lot of coaching and support and just a lot of love and hugs and kisses at this time, because it really is a time where a challenge for many of them. I'd also say that one of the things that I worry about is that literacy and learning about reading has often become a challenging task, a tough task. But I want parents to think about how they can make it fun for children. One of the ways they can do that is read to them, and read to them no matter what language they're using. Their native language is really important. Communicating about reading and telling stories will get children interested. You know, when I think of this time, I was thinking about this right before this program. And I was thinking, this is actually a unique time. And think about it. Think about the fact that so many parents are spending a lot more time with their children than they normally would do. You know, normally we have lots of activities and tasks. Various people are going to work and going off to various meetings. But a lot of time, the parents and children have been together at this point. And I'd love parents to think that this is a special time, that you may not ever have as much close time as you do now. And I would take advantage of it and support it and realize that we can develop a much more intimate relationship with our children in some ways than you know, in the normal situation.
So what are some suggestions for fun? How do we make it fun?
Well, I think one of the ways in which we make it fun is to not take too much time on it. So, for example, some parents have gotten the notion that children should read a certain amount of time per day. Mm. And I've actually watched my own grandchild. My daughter said, "You have to read an hour a day." And he takes that book and, oh, he hates it. He hates it. And he's looking at his watch every few minutes to know when that hour will be up. So I think that's not the way to engender a love of reading and a caring of reading. Rather, I would say to the parent and the child, read for a few minutes, talk about it, enjoy it, experience it, and put the book down when you're ready. Don't have any time stipulations. Just make every moment an interesting moment. I once had a little boy that I was working with. His name is Edward. And Edward was fascinated with one picture on one page of a book. And he would stare at that page and ask all sorts of questions. And I would want to go on to the next page because I was getting impatient. But then he would return and go back to that page because he wanted to study it a little bit more. And all of that is great because when children do that, they're really focusing and learning and beginning to answer their questions that they have. And I think that's really important.
That's great advice because I think Ellen and Jennifer and Elaine, maybe, you can talk about this, like, how did you, learn? But you're right. I think we wanted to have that, that rule, right? Like a 1 hour a day, like you have to memorize 100 vocabulary, right? Like words a day or things like that. And that takes the fun out of learning.
That really does.
Yeah.
It makes it a task.
Yeah. So when learning becomes a task, that's when students will start to resent.
That's right.
Yeah, well, that's great information. I know, Elaine, you also have a really, really interesting question for Dr. Neuman. Are you ready to ask that question?
Yeah. So personally for me, I think a lot of us have like grown up with the idea that like screen time and like too much TV is bad for you. It could damage your eyes. And so I know in your book, The Myth of the TV Effect, your idea that screen time and TV usage may not be as bad as people may believe. I was just wondering if you could walk us through your reasoning. And I know especially now during quarantine, more kids have been using increased amounts of screen time, whether that be for mandatory online classes or entertainment purposes.
Right.
I would also just like to know what advice would you give to parents who are like worried about the potential negative effects of screen time?
Right. I think that's such an interesting question. Thanks for asking it. Well, one of the things that we begin to realize is that many of our children read a book and then want to watch a television program on it. Their interests actually cross media lines. So I know that some of the children are terribly interested in Ninja Turtles, for example. And what they want to do is they want to watch the movie, they want to learn more about screen time, and they want to read the book. And that's really cool for them to cross those kinds of media lines. That is a developing of interest. And we really want our children to develop interest. That's very important. So we've done a fair amount of work on educational screen time. And what I mean by educational is we're not talking about some of the silly stuff, or we're certainly not talking about some of the violent stuff that we might see on television or on screens. And if I were a parent, I'd be very careful to stay away from inappropriate content that really is harmful for children. But educational television and educational screen time can actually help children. Children learn a lot of words when they're watching educational media. So for example, we have studied Dora the Explorer, which is a delightful program, and children love it. And we've focused on things like Sesame Workshop and Sesame Street and Blue's Clues and some of the Noggin books and screens. And what we're finding is that when children watch a little bit of media, not hour upon hour, but they can watch a little bit of media, we find that they are learning words on their own without any support whatsoever. And those words are important words. So they're adding to their vocabulary. And I think that one of the reasons that's the case is that interest is driving their learning. So they are really motivated to watch some of these delightful programs on the screen. And in doing so, like Martha Speaks and whatever, they're developing these words. And those words, that vocabulary is very strongly related to longer school achievement. So what I would say to parents is, first thing, make sure that they're watching or viewing appropriate content. And that's really important. Secondly, we don't want them to watch too much. In other words, very often in our studies, we have them watch 20 minutes or less at a time. Anymore, they're starting to get numb. We can sort of almost have a numbing effect when we watch too much television or too much screen time. So secondly, watch the time and make sure that there are limits on that time. Third, ask questions about it. You know, ask the child, what are you watching? What draws you, your interest? And would you like to read a book about the same topic? I bet it could really extend your interest. So we have found that more often than not, on the whole, if we talk about screen time, educational screen time on the mobile device or on the laptop and on a TV, children are doing it about 2 hours a day. Yeah, they're watching for pleasure about 2 hours a day and all together at different sort of increments. And this is okay. They're learning.
Great. Yeah, great information. So about 20 minutes-ish, and then just kind of guide them through the process and allow them to ask questions.
Right.
Yeah, great, great. This is a question that I just suddenly remember, because a lot of parents, they always want us to recommend books. And then so, right, I mean, there are lots of lists out there. Okay, you can read this, you can read that. But for me, I don't feel like there's a list, right? Like you have to read this book, right? So I'm sure you get questions like that. So how do you usually answer that question?
Well, I don't believe in lists. In fact, right before I spoke to you tonight, someone sent me a list, and it was not one thing that I would want to read.
Oh, my.
Because the reason I read is not necessarily for pleasure. And I want parents to think about this. We don't necessarily have a reading interest. I don't read because I'm interested in reading. I read because I want to learn. I read for a particular purpose. I read because I want to get more knowledgeable about particular things. So in other words, sometimes I'll read recipes because I want to cook something, or I'll read about directions because I want to know how to do something. So reading most often occurs for a purpose. And I'd like parents to really think about that. In other words, let's say the child is interested, my grandchild is so interested in orca whales. Oh, he loves everything about orca whales. So they may watch a video about orca whales, together and talk about that. But then what my son will do is they'll go to the library or they'll look at an e-list and see all the books they can find about orca whales. And that makes that important connection about, I want to learn more. And here's a book that really helps me learn about that. All of our children want to be expert. And I want parents to think about what expertise does my child want to have? Because once you feel like you're expert in a domain, you feel very powerful, don't you? So in other words, if you're interested in orca whales, or, here where I live on the beach, we see horseshoe crabs all the time. They're fascinating animals. I want to learn more. And I want to become a horseshoe crab expert. So all my friends will start asking me questions about it. That's how children develop interest, how children develop a sense of expertise. And that expertise drives learning. In other words, children begin to say to themselves, you know what? I'm smart. And I'm smart about this particular topic. And it's enormously motivating for not just reading, but actually learning in school, all sorts of subjects. So to go back to your question, I'm not about book lists. What I would say to the parent is, what is the child interested in? Let's make a list. Let's find the books that might intrigue you, and let's read more about them.
And I guess related question, parents will say, oh, my child is only interested in reading comic books. How can you make him read more, classic type of books, right? More grown-up books.
Well, actually, comic books and graphic novels are terrific. Don't underestimate them. Children learn a lot of vocabulary from them. So What I say to parents is if they're interested, let them devour them. And soon, after a while, they'll say, I've had enough of those comic books. I'm ready to try and read something else. But if we draw children's attention away and say comic books aren't good for the children, then we're denying children's natural interests. And that's not an effective technique for parents to use. It doesn't help. The other thing that parents will find, and at first I have to tell you, I really didn't like it, but hey, I go with it, is a lot of the books they want to read are not very good books. In other words, they're not classics. They're books that are based on movies or TV. And if you would look at them from a literary perspective, they are really not very good. I mean, they're pretty lame sentence structure and everything like that. But it does get children interested in reading. And as a result, we're finding that it gives parents and children a lot to talk about. And that verbal language is just as important as reading. So the more parents and children have something to talk about and convey with one another, the better children actually learn. So I say go for it. And then children, their interest will mature over time.
So it looks like to enhance your child's reading and writing skills, you need to interact and talk to them quite a bit.
Yes.
So what if, right, we have a lot of parents that are very busy, or maybe we also have parents who do not speak English, right? Maybe they have to work. So do we have any suggestions for these parents?
Well, we actually had a wonderful session with parents who, and we emphasized the fact that there are two things that they need to be aware of. One, the quantity of the talk, the interaction between parents and children is extraordinarily important. So the more times that you and I interact, not me lecturing you as a parent to a child, but actually interact with conversational turns, the more children are actually learning language. And that language, no matter what language it is, whether it's their primary or their secondary language, is very predictive of school success. So the children who have more language, the better they will be in terms of initial schooling and later schooling as well as they go to college. The second thing that parents can do is they can use unusual words. So in other words, very often mothers, especially young mothers, will use something we call motherese. Motherese is a term that goes like this. So in other words, I have a young child and I say to the young child, do you see what I see? It's a doggy, a doggy. Can you say doggy? And of course, many of the parents out there have very young children, and that's how we help children actually learn those words, doggy, slowing it down like that, and helping the children. And we use prosody, our expression, to make it very clear and understandable to the children. And that's wonderful. We call that motherese because it eases the language for the child. But that's wonderful. But at the same time, we need parents to also talk conversational language that they would have at a higher level. So in other words, it's important for the parents not to use too many easy words with their children. Don't be afraid of saying that is gorgeous instead of that's pretty. Don't be afraid of saying this is convoluted rather than it's complex. So using complex words or sophisticated words with your children actually helps them and orients that language so they begin to learn more words. And more words and higher level words is very predictive of children's success in school.
So does it mean that our parents should be learning too with their children?
Yes, it
Oh,
will
wait,
be.
the parents out there.
Right. We're always learning, aren't we?
Okay, so we need to have a class just for the parents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Jennifer, are you here? I remember you have also a really interesting question for Dr. Neuman.
Sure, I actually have two questions. I just thought of one.
Great.
So the first one is, so I know that like most parents, whenever they're trying to help their child maybe be more interested in reading and everything like that, they read to them, right? That's like the first thing that they would do. But are there other ways, like outside of reading or maybe like writing, that would help like stimulate a child's like creativity?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. We often talk about, in the field of reading, we often talk about the importance of reading to children. And that's really important because it's a kind of way for a parent and child to snuggle and enjoy hanging out together. You know, it's a very wonderful opportunity, a joint attention where the parent and child are focusing on one thing. But I want to be honest with everyone. My mother never read to me, nor my father never read to me. And so I learned to love books for a whole different reason. I was just fascinated with learning about ideas. So one of the ways in which parents can help, I think that reading to children is very important, but there are other things they can do as well. So for example, just going on daily errands, going to the grocery store is fascinating to children. Parents might think it's a dull and boring errand, but actually children are learning tons of words and experiencing all sorts of mathematical computations when they go to the grocery store. They're learning how to weigh and what poundage is, and all of those words are so critically important to learning the integration of literacy and math in words. So having parents, you know, there's an instinct sometimes of taking children on errands can be a pain, and I know that it can be tough sometimes, but actually in those daily errands, the children are learning so much, and they're learning and loving their parent at the same time, which is developing a closeness and a sense of safety that child will learn and need when they are learning reading. The other thing, of course, parents can do is the other thing that parents can do is go to things like parks and museums. You know, children are learning, even though when they're playing on those structures and whatever, they're learning from other children. So it's really important for the social interaction for children to play and play with others. And they learn a lot from these other children. So I think that the point that I'm trying to say is that while reading to children is very important, children are learning so many other things through their day-to-day interaction. And those interactions are every bit as important as being read to.
Great, that's such a great point. I think it's definitely so important to be doing like other things that will also help. So my second question is, I know in schools and even some libraries provide like summer reading lists or a list of or like books that you have to read during class, especially maybe at like a higher school level. So how do you think that the reading lists or like the books that you're like required to read, how can schools like kind of cater it more towards like the student and maybe make the student like enjoy it more, other than just being like forced to like read that book that is assigned?
Right. Well, I think that's another terrific question. I'll tell you something. I'm examining all these interviews we did last year and the year before, over 165 interviews from parents. And one of the things that they will often tell me is that their children hate to read. they hate to read. And when we dig down and try and understand why do they hate to read, it's because some of them will say it's because they were required to read certain books and they just hated them. And they really wanted to read a book of their interest, but they were required to read a certain book. So required reading, I understand that many schools want children to have a canon of reading, but that often turns children off terribly. And so I would try, if I were a teacher in class down, I would try to make that required list very, very small and really, really learn from the children what they want to read. The other thing that I think is really key and not described enough is in a lot of those lists, there's very little about the cultural background and interests of the children who are in our schools now. And a lot of children and their parents want to learn more about their own culture. And there are too few books that really help them focus and learn about their culture. And it is extraordinary to me that our required lists still have a very European bent to them, a classics bent that often doesn't take into account the rich literature from so many other cultures that children could be exposed to. This is not only children who are from African American, Asian, or Spanish heritage. White children need to read about these children as well, because that's how they learn, and that's how we begin to understand and appreciate our diverse culture. So I would like to see a much more multicultural set of suggested books that children could choose from. And I think that if it touches their heart and it touches who they are, they'll want to read more.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really glad that parents are now asking questions, because I know parents have a lot of questions. One, this question I get all the time, and I really would love to hear what suggestions you have. So many of our students are old, like here, and the parents, they have older students, like high school students or middle school students, and they just don't like to read, or they're too busy, right? Especially like if you go to TJ, that's a really stressful environment. You don't have the time to read other books. So what suggestions do we have for these kids? How do we make them read more? Because they're already busy, or they just don't care, maybe.
Right. There are periods of times where you don't read as much. And I think people need to take a more life developmental perspective about reading. So for example, there are periods where children in the elementary grades, around 4th, 5th grades, often become great readers. The reason is they can now do it on their own. They don't need their teacher. They have, they've developed some skill, and now they just become voracious readers, because it's almost like, you've learned your piano scales, and now you're able to actually, play a song on your own without, the pain and suffering of those scales. So it's a very exciting time, and there's often a reading spurt right around the 4th and 5th grade level. But then kids often get very involved in sports and other activities, and the reading becomes required reading, whether it's content-based or whatever. And I think we have to just assume that that's going to happen. There are periods in my semester, for example, I'm about to go back to teaching the beginning of the fall semester, and I'll be reading less, much less, because I'll be very involved with other things. We want reading to be a wonderful alternative to some kids, or to as many kids who we can entice. But we should not assume that all of our students will read like a certain amount all the time. It is really an ebb and flow. And so most of us know that summer is a great time for reading. Fall is a great time not to be reading and be watching TV and football and all sorts of sports programs. And I think that parents need to just relax a little bit and say that the important thing is interest and engagement and motivation. It is not about requirement.
Mm. That's a really, really good suggestion. So now I guess related, we have a second question that's kind of like that. A lot of people read, but they read fast, meaning that they're not really absorbing the information very carefully. So there's no close reading. So how do we facilitate that? And then how do we use that to help with their writing skills?
Right. You know, I think that one of the points, unfortunately, in school is that we focus on fluency too much, which means we focus on reading fast and getting through a certain amount of material. And it has led often to a very bad habit of children reading words without comprehending at all what they're reading. And very often we call it word calling. And it gets to be, if it's allowed to continue, it gets to be a very poor habit that can have long-term effects. So if I were a parent, I would say, if you're, if you're not comprehending what you're reading, slow down and don't feel that you are a poor reader because you're reading slower. You'll need to read slower because the material gets more difficult. So for students as they go on to middle school and high school, the density of the vocabulary in content books is very, very high. And so what that means is they can't read as if they're reading a novel or a comic book. They've got to adjust their reading. And sometimes in our schools, they don't teach the difference between different kinds of reading. And so parents would just be wise to say to the children, this is tough reading. If you're reading a science text, you cannot read it quickly and comprehend it. You need to go down and slow down, reread if necessary, and not to think that you are a poor reader for doing that. You are a close reader, and that's really important to gain the comprehension of what you're reading.
So we want to promote close reading versus fast reading.
That's right. Close reading
word calling.
Yeah, word calling is something we call word calling when I can read the words, but I don't have a clue what they mean. And that's really dangerous because you get into a habit of just reading like crazy. And there's no expectation that I should understand what I'm reading. So sometimes what we do for remediation with word calling is we encourage the children to read just a little bit, maybe even a sentence or two sentences. And then we say to the child, tell me what you just read. Tell me about it. Just, what are you thinking as you were reading that? Or read a little bit of newspaper. Tell me what you were thinking. And it encourages the child to say, oh my gosh, I should be thinking as I'm reading, not just reading those words. I should actually stop and think, do I know what they mean? And if not, do I need to ask questions? Do I need to go to the dictionary? Do I need to reread?
So I guess reading and writing, they're closely related. So how can reading help with writing?
I think reading and writing are very closely related, and most of our children, as well as our teachers, are actually scared of writing. Writing is a difficult task, but very often we call it thinking with a pencil. It really is thinking with a pencil. So if I'm writing and I have trouble writing, it's generally because I'm having trouble thinking about the ideas. So I need to very often verbally talk about ideas, before I go to write. So writing helps reading, reading helps writing. So some of us read, and I bet you're one of them, some of us read like writers. And what we mean by that is when I read a book now, I read from the author's perspective. I actually say, oh, she's trying to trick me. She's trying to tell me that something bad is going to happen, or she's using this device to get me interested. She's using short sentences to get me involved. So in other words, all of a sudden I'm beginning to read just like a writer. I'm trying to understand the craft of writing, and that helps my reading, but it also helps my writing.
So we're learning from the writer as we read.
Exactly. Yeah. And that makes us a better writer. And writing is a very difficult task for many of our kids because they don't do it enough. And one of the things I did when I was young is I started writing in a journal every single day. I would just write a few lines, maybe just about my day or what I was thinking. And what I found that would do is it would just release me. It would make me less scared of looking at that blank page, you know, and just putting stuff down, any kind of stuff. And so a parent can even just try something really, really simple. You can ask children a very simple question like, you know, what did you think about the convention? What did you think about this article? And just ask them to write a sentence and then talk about it a little bit. But that gets them on the road to writing and writing on a regular basis. And it's the frequency of writing that really helps the writing task.
That's a great suggestion. So basically our parents can give, oh my God, I'm giving you guys homework ideas. Don't hate me. But parents, I guess you can ask a simple question and then ask your child to write simple things, right? Simple sentences, and then just talk about it, right?
Right.
And don't worry about grammar and things like that, right? Just
right. Exactly. In the very beginning, when I would write, I would have a lot of words that were spelled incorrectly. But if someone had corrected my spelling, I would have stopped writing. And I would have also only focus on the words that I could spell correctly and not on the words I was trying to experiment with. So it's focusing on the content of what kids are writing and not focusing on the grammar or the spelling.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good suggestion that parents can try to use. Perfect. Let me see. We have like a lot of questions. So I think this one's also a really common one that we get. Like, how do you get kids to be interested in reading nonfiction?
Well, actually, I find that little boys especially, now that sounds very gendered, but little boys especially really want to read nonfiction. They really like things about real things because all of our children really want to know. Some of the nonfiction books are really boringly written, and so I would stay away from them. But there are a lot of new books that are nonfiction that are very interesting with lots of pictures and graphics. And I think for parents, one of the benefits, one of the things they should think about is introducing these books very early on to children and just letting them ask questions. So sometimes when parents read to children, they ask too many questions. And what I always say is let the child ask the question and not the adult. So instead of saying, what's this, what's this, what's this, what's this, say to the child, what do you find interesting here? Oh, this is such a great picture. I see that, you know, all these different fish are in the ocean. What one would you like to learn more about? So asking open-ended questions so the children really get engaged. So many of our kids will love nonfiction books even more than fiction because they see it as a purpose for reading. I want to learn more about. I want to learn more about trucks. I want to learn more about fish and oceans. I want to learn more about unusual weather. And if we can introduce those books early on, they'll get hooked. They really do.
Great suggestions. I hope you guys are taking notes. Do we have any more questions from the parents? Because I know Dr. Neuman has to go at 7 o'clock, so if you have more questions, just ask away. Okay, wow. How do you encourage kids to read a wide range of books, not just, like one, like novels?
Yes. How do you encourage children to read a wide range of books? I think here's one of the strategies that we use. So, for example, we have in our school a theme called Wild Weather. Wild Weather. They're fascinated with all sorts of different kinds of weather patterns and everything like that, like hail and thunderstorms and hurricanes and things like that. And so we introduce children to nonfiction books, as I just indicated, because there can often be few words on those pages and lots of pictures and things to get children interested in. And then what we'll do is we'll introduce a fiction book on the same topic. So we call it a narrative nonfiction book. It's actually a story about weather, but it's a different kind of what we call genre. It's a storybook about something related to weather. And then we'll give children, we'll have another kind of book called a predictable book. And this might be a song or a rhyme or a poem, and it's all about weather. So what we do is we take children's interests and we create many different genres across to introduce children to different kinds of books. Predictable books, poetry, mysteries about weather, narrative nonfiction, and fiction books.
That's also another great idea. So you introduce them with like same topic, but different types of books.
That's right.
Yeah, so that goes back to what you said earlier about interest, right? As long as they're interested in this subject, they're more likely to read more about it.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. I know this question is really, I think I kind of asked this question, but like if parents just don't have the time, right? Or they just don't have the ability, are their kids like doomed? Yeah, what can we do if parents just don't have the time to read for their kids? Yeah.
I think they do.
Okay, parents.
but I know that is the most common issue, that they don't have time. And I think all you need is 5 minutes.
Okay.
We all have 5 minutes. Even the busiest parents. In fact, we just reviewed a study, and it turns out the busiest parents spend the most time with their child. Isn't that counterintuitive? So in other words, parents who have the most difficult and long hours type job, according to a national survey, actually spend 4.5 hours more per week with their child. So they make time. And I think that one of the things that we've got to do is make time for those children, because they're only age 4 once in their life, and we can't miss that opportunity. So I know we're all busy. Things are very hectic. We're making dinner, we're doing laundry, we're trying to work, we're all over the place. But what I'd ask parents is just take a moment and pay attention and just enjoy that moment and either read, sing, talk, play with your child. That's all you need.
That's great suggestion. So again, just 5 minutes, it's enough. And I think Dr. Neuman said it earlier too. You don't. It can be in Chinese, right? Your native language. It doesn't have to be in English, because the goal is to develop their interest in reading or writing or singing or talking, right? Expressing themselves.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you have time, I guess.
Yeah. And we want our children to be bilingual and trilingual at times. We don't want them to lose their native language, and we don't want them to not gain another language. I mean, in the United States, unfortunately, we have often privileged English over their native language, and that's terribly unfortunate. Right now, at my age, I'm learning Spanish. And I can tell you that as an adult, learning Spanish isn't easy, even though they say it's an easy language. Well, it's not easy for me. But if children are learning the language and talking with their parents in the native language, reading books in their native language, they're going to get a lot of English in school, and we want them to be multilingual. It's really a benefit in terms of how they live their life, but also it's a cognitive benefit. They get smarter by learning more language. So we want them to maintain and increase in multi-languages.
Great. I'm going to ask like one last question from the audience, and then I'm going to turn it to Dr. Neuman and see if there's anything else that you wanted to share, maybe you haven't been able to. So this is from our audience. Is there anything like a rating system, like the movie rating system, PG-13R, because some of the books don't align with their family values, so they're just curious?
Oh, I think that's a wonderful question from a parent. I have a very strong view about having children read things that build character, that we are at a unique period in our country where there are divisions and hatred between people that I've never seen in my history ever. And so if I were a parent now, what I would do is I would pick those kinds of opportunities where they can see how children of different cultures are coming together, forming friendships, sharing with one another, values that all of us appreciate and cherish. I think that one of the things that we want so badly is for our parents to teach our children their civil responsibility of learning how to act in a civil society, of acting kind to one another. And I would select those books that really convey those kind of morals and values, because that's what reading is about. It's not just about the skill of reading. It's about developing knowledge about who we want our children to become, the kind of character we want our children to develop.
Great answer. So is there anything else that maybe you wanted to share but haven't with our audience?
Well, I know we only have a couple of seconds, and so I would just say to parents, be kind to your children at this time. Be sure, recognize that this is a tough time. There are many things going on in our country that are scary as heck. There's a time where we have an election coming up. We have COVID at the same time occurring. We don't know what's going to be happening with COVID in the next upcoming months. And so many of our children are going to have remote instruction. They're going to have maybe 1 or 2 days. They're going to have to learn to go to school with masks on. They're going to have to learn new rules of engagement that they've never even considered before. And so when they're home, I think, a hug and is more what they need than sit down and do this homework and do these skills. I think parents need to understand and be understanding to our children and not expect too much in a time that is very, very challenging for them. So I would just finally encourage them to give their kids a little bit of a break, give them a smooch and a hug, and understand that they're doing the best that they can in these challenging times.
Thank you so much. Elaine?
So unfortunately, that is all the time we have tonight for questions. On behalf of the whole BranchOut Core Panel team, we hope that everybody has enjoyed the event this evening. In addition, we hope our audience has learned a great deal about issues concerning childhood education and literacy development, and everyone gained some helpful suggestions and ideas on encouraging students and had their questions answered as well. We are extremely appreciative of our speaker, Dr. Susan Neuman, for her time and giving us such great insight and suggestions on how we can support our students. We are also very thankful to our audience members for making this panel so great and asking some wonderful questions. This will be our last panel of the summer, but to learn more about BranchOut, please check us out at www.bellbranchout.org or like us on Facebook at Veritas Education Leaders. We look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Neuman. I learned so much.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for inviting me. It was lots of fun and best of luck.
Thank you. Thank